Time for some classwork contemplations. And what will we talk about today? We're not going to do a lot of math today. We're going to talk a lot today. Why should you buy a house instead of renting? Debt is devastating. I can't emphasize that enough. Boy, oh boy. Debt myths. PYF, pay yourself first. And the benefits of giving. This is all about money management here, guys. Why buy instead of rent? Well, there are some really good reasons. The first one is that it is a forced savings account. What it means is that when you buy a house, eventually you're going to get what you call equity in the house. And generally speaking, it's extremely rare that home values over the long term go down. They almost always go up. So it's like putting money in the bank by taking care of your house. Okay. And of course, you get to make all the decisions with your own house. So that's another reason. But it is a forced savings account. You will be putting money away for the long term. Next, it's a hedge against inflation. Because with inflation, like right now, we are experiencing the worst inflation since I believe Jimmy Carter was president a long, long time ago. At the beginning of the Reagan term, right after Carter, there was still leftover inflation from Carter. Inflation's a big deal. Basically, what it means is that if you would have spent $100 on certain items, because the inflation rate now is 7%, you would have spent $107 a year later. And if that keeps going unchecked, then it really raises a lot. But it also means this. It means that if you put money in the bank, the bank's interest rate doesn't go up nearly as much as the rate of inflation goes up. So your money is worth less. It has a lower buying power, and we don't want that. But as inflation goes, inflation will also inflate, typically, the cost of a house. So with that inflation increase, the value of your home tends to increase. Therefore, the money that you invest in your house is not decreasing in value. It's increasing with inflation. And of course, it's increasing for other reasons as well. But the inflation alone will mean that money you put there doesn't lose its value. Okay? Equity in the house. This is a biggie. We talked about mortgages last week, and we talked about the fact that you get equity in your house as you pay off the house. To give you some very specific numbers, the house I lived in before we moved up here, it cost me $250,000, 247, something like that, 250,000 roughly for the house. And I had at that time a 15-year mortgage on that house. I started with a 30, then I refinanced quickly into a 15. And with the 15-year mortgage, I moved when there was like 4 or 5 years left on the mortgage. I'm not exactly sure how much, but the 250,000 that I originally owed went down to about 90,000. So I made 160,000 equity on the house. And I used that $160,000 coupled with long-term savings money and the mortgage to pay for the house I live in now. So the equity you grow, when you rent a house instead of equity, you do not save any of the money. The landlord saves the money. So it's not a hedge against inflation because you don't own the house. It is not a forced savings account because you don't get to keep any of the money. And you don't get any value in the house. It's not like you get to sell the apartment years from now. When your time is up, you just leave and they rent it to another person. A house grows virtually tax-free, and this is a really big deal. When I took money out of my retirement account to help build the house that I live in now, I had to pay some serious taxes on it. Like 22% of that went to tax money, 25%, something like that. It was significant. Maybe even been 30%. If you make money off of your house, like the 160,000 that I rolled in from my house to here, I didn't have to pay taxes on that. So having that basically makes me keep 25 to 30% of the money in my pocket rather than giving it to the government. And if you would like to give money to the government, you're more than welcome to. I would particularly like to keep my money as much as possible. And the best mortgage you can possibly have is no mortgage. Some people will tell you should always have a mortgage, but they haven't crunched the numbers. The reason they'll tell you that is because a mortgage, your interest on a mortgage is tax deductible. And it is. So let's say you pay $10,000 in a year. and in interest on your mortgage. That's great, but you don't get $10,000 back. You only get your tax rate of that 10,000 back. So if your tax rate is say 25%, you get 2,500 out of the 10,000 back. But if you didn't have a mortgage, if you owned the house outright, then you never pay the 10,000. So you get to keep the whole 10,000, not just 2,500 out of the 10,000. So the best mortgage is no mortgage. But let's be realistic here. Very few people are in a position where they can flat out buy a house for themselves and they never have to worry about, or they have the resources to pay for a house cash. That just doesn't happen. Okay. So with that in mind, and we went all through mortgages last week, the best thing you can do is come up with a 15-year mortgage. Fight to afford that because you get max equity in the house, and over time, you're in much better shape. Remember that graph we showed last time? If you buy a 15-year mortgage as compared to a 30-year mortgage, in that problem, it was like $1,834 a month that you had as your principal and interest payment if you had a 30-year mortgage, and you did have $2,200 and change if you had a 15-year mortgage. But at the 15-year point, yeah, okay, you've spent $400 extra a month for the first 15 years. But for the next 15 years, you spend nothing. Absolutely nothing. So you spend zero a month, and the other guy's spending $1,834 a month. So if you can afford the 15-year, afford it. The big thing is with financial planning and putting yourself in these positions, think long-term and not short-term. So those are some really strong reasons to buy instead of rent. Now, that said, I rented when I first started teaching. I rented for about a year and a half. Okay. Most people have to rent when they first start. When I was in college, I rented an apartment. So it's not a sin to rent. It doesn't make you a bad person, but you should be looking to get into a house and own a house as soon as possible if you're looking at it from a best financial decision point of view for the decisions, for the reasons we just listed. Next, debt. Debt is the most aggressively, successfully marketed product in the history of the United States of America. They have people convinced that things like credit cards and car loans and stuff like that is good for you. I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing it at all. All right, let's talk about that for a little bit. This very evil person named Joseph Goebbels, he was a Nazi propaganda minister. He said that if you repeat a lie often enough, it becomes the truth. Not that it's really the truth. It's definitely not really the truth. But people believe it as the truth. It's something that you see political parties do all the time, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, a liberal or a conservative. If you only listen to Fox News, you only hear one side of the story. If you only listen to CNN or MSNBC, you only hear one side of the story. And so often, months later, it turns out that what they've been telling you, both sides, not just one side, is anything from a spin or a flat-out falsehood. But people believe it. And that's what it means when it says, if you repeat a lie often enough, it becomes the truth, in the sense that the public believes the truth. So how many times have you seen credit card commercials on TV? How many times have you seen car commercials where they talk about financing at the end? They make more money off of you financing the car than they do off of the purchase of the car. I know that. I just bought myself a Dodge Ram 2500 with a Cummins turbo diesel engine. Before that, I had an Acura MDX. And I wanted the car or the truck, I should say, because it fits my lifestyle up here. I love my MDX. I didn't want to get rid of it at all. But and it was paid for. I didn't know a dime on it. But when I went to buy the truck, I said, I'm going to pay cash for it. You could see the guy start like, well, we can finance it this way. We can finance it that way. No, I'm going to pay cash for it. And when I walked in to buy the truck, the first thing I did was negotiate the price. I did not negotiate the financing. I said, we'll talk about financing later. So we negotiated the price, got the best price I possibly could. And then I said, okay, now it's going to be cash. And like I said, the guy was heartbroken because they would have made, an extra few $1,000s on me if it would have been through financing. But instead it was cash, so they didn't make any money on me at all. So here's a myth. You need a credit card to rent a car or to make purchases online. It's simply not true. You can use a debit card. Now, what's the difference between a credit card and a debit card? A debit card takes money directly out of your checking account. And you might say, well, why do I want to do that? I might run out of money in my checking account. Well, if that's the case, then you don't have any money to pay the credit card. And the credit card is going to charge you, particularly when you're young, 18% interest, 24% interest. It's going to charge you a very high amount of interest. So you don't want any part of that money being on the credit card, or else you're paying even more. So this is what I mean about debt being so aggressively and successfully marketed. See, the companies know that a credit card company like you, Capital One, what's in your wallet? They understand that, first off, when you buy the item, let's say you buy a $100 item from a store, 3% goes to the company. So $3 is going to go to the credit card company. And then they strongly suspect that you're not going to pay off the debt in a month, that you're going to pay off your credit card. So now they're going to earn interest on that. So they're going to earn 18 to 24% interest, which is absurd. It's usury. It's so much money. And they're going to make that money off of you. You, on the other hand, are going to sit there and pay that money. So you worked really, really hard to get your paycheck, and the chunk of it is going to the credit card, not for an item. It's not like you're paying the credit card and you're like, oh, wow, look, I got these awesome clothes, or I went on this vacation. No, you're not getting any of that. You're giving them the money that you could have kept for yourself and saved for those things. Instead, the company gets it from you. So you want no part of a credit card debt at all. And remember also how we showed you how the compound interest works for you, okay? And it makes you wealth long term. Well, it can also work against you. And credit cards also work on compound interest. So when you make a credit card payment, like let's say you have to, I'll give you, for instance, I put $5,200 on my credit card last month. And if I did not, the minimum payment that they recommended was for me to make about $120 payment. And if that's all I would have paid of that $120, over $100 would have went to interest. And only like $18 would have went to principal. Now I paid off the whole $5,200. In fact, I paid that and more, so I have a head start on the next month's payment. All right. But that's the way credit cards work. Boy, they're very, very dangerous. A debit card will take it right out of your checking account. Then you know that you don't have money to spend that you don't have. And you can still rent a car, and you can still make online purchases. Here's the myth. I'll pay mine off every month. And then look, I get airline miles. I get such and such a percent, blah, blah, blah. The truth is that more than 100 million Americans do not pay the balance off every single month. Now, let me tell you what happened to me personally. When I had my first credit cards, I thought I'd pay it off every month, and it didn't work out that way. Twice I ran up against problems, and I got to the point where I had about $10,000 in credit card debt, $7,000 to $10,000, which is not, there are people with $90,000 in credit card debt. So I was uncomfortable. And I've learned if I'm in debt, my stomach literally bothers me. So I don't get in debt. But I couldn't pay it off. So I went to, stupid me, I went to my long-term savings accounts, the ones that had money put aside in compound interest. And I pulled out some money from the compound interest to pay off the credit card. And I said, I'll never make that mistake again. If I would have left the money in there, the $10,000 I took out probably would have been worth around $40,000 to $80,000 by the time I retired. Stupid me. Next, the second time I did it, it was much later in the game, and I really learned my lesson then. I took out about another $7,000 or $8,000, and same thing. It would have been worth, because it was later in the game, it probably only would have been worth around $25,000, maybe $30,000. But I cost myself $100,000 by doing that. So that's some serious money. You don't want to do it. Now I have learned, and I truly do have the discipline to pay the thing off every month. Like I just said, I'm ahead on the next month's payment. But it is not something wise to do. Yes, I do get a check for around $1,200 a year from the credit card company for my purchases and so on and so forth. But I run a zero balance. So I get the $1,200. If I get my check for $1,200 and I'm running behind and I'm paying $5,000 in interest per year to the credit card company, they're laughing all the way to the bank. The person who does that saying, "Ooh, I made $1,200," they go, "You gave me $3,800." So 100 million Americans a year don't pay the balance off, and they get themselves into trouble. Like I said, I got into trouble twice. I will never get into trouble again.
Credit cards make young adults responsible with money. No. No, yes. Yeah, well, let me laugh. I'm laughing. Using me as an example. You do make young adults responsible with money. Unfortunately, they tend not to learn the lesson for about 10 or 15 years. And in the meanwhile, they get slammed with losses like I did that could have been worth upwards of $100,000 later on down the line. There's other ways to teach young adults to be responsible with money than credit cards, okay? Credit card companies target young adults. They want them to get the credit card because they know that they do not have the discipline to pay that thing off every month. And now they've got them. They also know that, it's so hard nowadays. It's brutally, brutally hard to really take care of the advertising that comes through. In the next video, we'll pick up at that point.